Hello, boxing fans around the world. Thank you for joining me once again on Talk and Fight for another episode of Boxing News Today, courtesy of our friends from across the pond at boxing247.com. But I'm going to start you off with a little story that comes out of Boxing News 24. First of all, it's about someone who's training out in Montreal and a fight that will take place out of Montreal. Artur Beterbiev, who's 16-0 with 16 knockouts, will be looking to register his 17th consecutive knockout next month when he defends his IBF and WBC light heavyweight titles against his mandatory WBC challenger, Marcus Surbrown, who's 24-1 with 16 knockouts. The two-time Russian Olympian Beterbiev wants to stay on a crash course, of course, for a potential mega fight against Canelo Alvarez in 2022. The Mexican superstar Alvarez let top-ranked promoter Bob Arum know last September that he's interested in challenging Beterbiev for his two 175-pound titles soon. Anyway, I raise this because it's interesting to see who will be challenging whom as we get into what we might call the politics of the day, which brings us to an upcoming fight this weekend between George Kambosos and Teofimo Lopez. As George Kambosos is already mapping out an undisputed clash with WBC light heavyweight champion Devin Haney, should he unseat the IBF, WBA, WBC franchise WBO 135-pound champion Lopez this Saturday night. This, by the way, is Teofimo's first defense of his WBA, WBC franchise and WBO titles he captured a little over a year ago against Vasily Lomachenko back in October. And Teofimo could have fought Lomachenko in a rematch for big money, but chose to defend against his IBF mandatory challenger, Kambosos. Says the author of this article in Boxing News 24. He says it's a baffling move and a total waste of time, but it shows that there are some confidence issues for Teofimo that led him to taking this much lesser fight against Kambosos rather than doing the logical thing by facing Lomachenko in a rematch. Teo's rationale for fighting Kambosos, by the way, was that he wanted to hold on to his IBF title because he would have stripped it due to his mandatory defense being due. Interestingly, Teofimo reportedly will be vacating his 4 lightweight titles after his defense against Kambosos, making it pointless for him to take this fight. If Lopez could have made more money fighting Lomachenko in a rematch or by fighting Gervonta Davis, it would have made more sense to take one of those fights, even if it meant losing his IBF title. You could argue that Teofimo may have lacked the confidence to take the riskier fights against Tank or Lomo, so he opted to take the easy, sure thing payday against Kambosos. For his part, the Australian Kambosos believes a fight between him and the unbeaten WBC 135-pound strap holder Haney, who's 26-0 with 15 knockouts and has been featured quite regularly on Talking Fight, can bring in as much as 90,000 fans in a stadium fight in Australia. Besides the daunting task of the weaker, slower-punching Kambosos pulling off a massive upset against the younger 24-year-old Lopez, it's difficult to imagine a fight involving Haney bringing in 90,000 fans. Haney isn't a big name yet in the U.S., and likely he's even less known in Kambosos' native Australia. You would think that Kambosos would need more established star like Tank Davis to bring in a massive crowd in Australia. It's not that Haney, 22, isn't a good fighter, but he's just starting. And he hasn't beaten anyone other than older guys, 35-year-old Jorge Linas, 40-year-old Gamboa, and a bunch of obscure fighters. Although Kambosos is a clear underdog for his title challenge against the unbeaten Teofimo Lopez, who's 16-0 with 12 knockouts, he's convinced that he'll come out on top Saturday night when the two battle at Madison Square Garden in New York. Elsewhere, speaking of politics, big news today, so to speak, regarding the ongoing, if you will, fallout of the Crawford versus Porter fight, where immediately after that fight, Crawford dumped Bob Arum. It's interesting to note that Matchroom boxing promoter Eddie Hearn says he's no interest in taking on fighter Terence Crawford now that he's a free agent. Hearn says he doesn't have the fights to offer Crawford to sign the 34-year-old WBO welterweight champion. Okay. If he did sign Crawford, he'd likely be just as unhappy as he'd been with Top Ranked after failing to produce the fights he wants against Spence and Ugas. For Crawford to potentially get a fight with Spence or Ugas, he needs to ink with PBC, but even then, it's not a guarantee that either of those unification matches will take place. Elsewhere, we see on other fight sites regarding Eddie Hearn's comments about not wanting to take on Terence Crawford. This article says on boec.com, even though it might sound like a good idea to many, the newest boxing free agent, Terence Crawford, won't be going to Matchroom Boxing. Matchroom Boxing and DAZN have the best fighters right now, arguably, but according to Hearn, there's no place for one of the very best boxers of this generation in his stable. It's business, says Hearn. Top Rank has paid Crawford a lot of money. They've lost a lot of money, and I would think that they've lost substantial money last weekend. I think they would have lost massive money on the Amir Khan fight. So they've backed Terence Crawford, but that's what you have to do as a promoter. They have not been able to deliver him the marquee fights. Don't forget, the Crawford-Porter fight was called by the WBO, not by Bob Arum. Someone came over to me today from the U.S. media and said, "Are you going to sign Terence Crawford?" Continued Hearn. "Why would I sign Terence Crawford? What fights do I have for Terence Crawford? He wants to fight Errol Spence. And even if they did, and they may, why would they go to us to make the fight? It's kind of like Canelo with Caleb Plant. Canelo had to go out to PBC to make that fight happen. So if that's their mentality and attitude, we don't work with other guys, we're only in-house people, then Crawford might as well sign with PBC. I don't have any welterweight fights to offer him, really," said Hearn about his Matchroom company. "I've got money. Of course he wants money, but he also wants a legacy," Hearn said. "I don't think we're the place for him, and I don't think we'll make him an offer because he's very expensive." Elsewhere, we see on back to Boxing News 24 here. I'm bouncing back and forth, but I just found this whole story of Terence Crawford in the aftermath of the Porter fight quite interesting because it tends to illustrate the impact of politics and egos in this sport. Said Terence Crawford, for instance, me and Sean Porter fought on an app, ESPN Plus. There were so many people, they didn't know how to get the app on TV, and they don't know how to do it. He's speaking of an older audience. The average elderly that doesn't know tech, they're not going to know how to get the app on TV. So what they do, they don't buy it. There's a reason why he's beating these guys that he's beaten, said Crawford about Sean Porter. It takes skills to do what he do. It's not just like a straight come forward fighter that mauls you. No, he's coming with technique and skills. He's thinking in there at the same time. Now he's commenting on the fact that the fight on pay-per-view didn't make a lot of money, quite frankly, and one of the reasons he was upset at Bob Arum, and he's complaining that it was shown only on ESPN Plus. Anyway, the fact is, Porter was viewed as past his prime after losing to Errol Spence Jr. in 2019 and fighting only once since then, bottom fringe contender Sebastian Formello. Porter has done nothing to redeem himself since his loss to Spence, and he didn't deserve a world title shot, says the author of this article. If this was the NFL, Porter would have lost the Super Bowl in 2019 to Spence, beat an 8-8 team, Formello, and then was given a Super Bowl chance. That's not how it's supposed to be. And it's not surprising that the boxing public chose not to purchase the Crawford-Porter fight. The fight was a farce, and the fans knew it. It's funny that he came to my fight because he said he would never come to my fight, said Crawford about Errol Spence Jr. coming to his fight against Porter. When I came to his fight against Danny Garcia, he got on the microphone saying, "I didn't even know why he's here. I wouldn't be at none of his fights. I just look at him, damn, that's kind of crazy. There was two of my fights early in my career before I was even champion. And you were a fan. You weren't even a pro, but now that you're in the same division and you're running scared, you won't come to my fights?" I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. I thought you were a fan of boxing. So it was ongoing chitter-chatter between Terence Crawford in the aftermath of that Porter fight. But one last point here. He says, "I'm disappointed with former WBA, WBC welterweight champion Keith one-time Thurman saying he needs 8 months before he'll be ready to fight for a world title in 2022. WBO 147-pound champion Crawford, 38-0, as I said, wonders why Thurman, who's 29-1, 22 knockouts, needs so much time to get ready for a world title against him. Of course, from the 33-year-old Thurman's perspective, he'll have been out of the ring for almost 3 years when he makes his comeback in 2022, and that's a long time for a fighter to be inactive. It's implausible that Crawford, who's 33, would immediately jump into a world title fight if he'd been out of the ring for 3 solid years. "Why do I got to wait so long?" said Crawford. That just shows he don't believe in himself like he needs to. It's obvious why Crawford has to wait before fighting Thurman. One time, Thurman isn't crazy to go straight into a fight with Crawford after 3 years out of the ring and fighting at roughly 60% capacity. It would be suitable for Crawford if Thurman fought him immediately in his first fight back, but that would be foolish. If Thurman wasn't as famous as he is, Crawford could give him a take it or level it ultimatum by letting him know that he must take the fight with him now, or else he'll never get the shot. The 30-year-old Crawford can't afford to do that because, in poor opinion, big money fights at 147. He's also getting older. Crawford needs to fight a beatable guy like Thurman because if he waits much longer, the WBO will make Jerome Ennis or Virgil Ortiz Jr. his mandatory. Those guys will likely beat Crawford. With the way Crawford struggled against the gatekeeper Sean Porter last Saturday night, he's not going to beat Ennis or Ortiz Jr. So concludes today's little episode on Terence Crawford. Speaking of legacy statements, up-and-comer Richard Torrez says he wants to be remembered forever as a world heavyweight champion as he prepares to start his title pursuit. The 22-year-old American has signed a promotional deal with Top Rank after returning from this Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo with a silver medal. With a professional debut planned in February, Torrez has vowed to earn a reputation as a dominant champion. Good luck to him. For the last story of the day, it's regarding Triple G, who's breaking his silence on Canelo Alvarez, and regarding questions over Trilogy fight, which are still open according to Triple G. He reveals in an interview that a third fight has been posed by Saul Canelo Alvarez, but his questions remain unanswered by his bitter rival. Canelo elevated himself to fated status as the world's #1 pound-for-pound fighter by becoming the undisputed super middleweight champion and beating 3 previously undefeated title holders inside a year. The Mexican superstar is next targeting a belt in a 5th division against WBC cruiserweight champion Lunga Makuba, but one of his in-demand tasks is to finally settle his rivalry with Golovkin. So we're waiting to see if that happens. This fight is possible, Golovkin told Sky Sports. Theoretically, nothing has changed. There are certain questions which have been posed. They are still open. They remain unanswered. We have been discussing it, but haven't moved forward towards this fight for quite some time. You're interested because he beat all the UK fighters, but it is no concern to me. Golovkin and Canelo have fought 2 classic middleweight title fights, the first in 2017 and in a draw. The rematch was won by Canelo via majority decision. Those results are the only blemishes in a fearsome record of Golovkin, who still maintains that he deserved the judge's verdict when he met Canelo for the first time. We fought. I know who he is. I don't think about him at all, Golovkin reacted. It isn't something I don't give any thought to. Golovkin, who's now 39, is set to return to the ring in December in Japan against Ryota Maruta in a fight that will unify the IBF and WBA middleweight titles. All right, sports fans, thank you very much for joining me once again on Talkin' Fight. I appreciate it. Remember to like, share, subscribe our channel, and hit that notification bell. And we'll see you tonight at 7 p.m. for the Friday night panel, and before that, 4 p.m. with Knuckle Up.